Good evening, everybody. My name is Sarah James. I'm doing my argumentative speech tonight on controlled distribution of livestock antibiotics in farms and ranches. The Federal Drug Administration, or the FDA, is announcing the availability of a draft in the beginning of 2020 entitled Recommendations for Sponsors of Medically Important Antimicrobial Drugs Approved for Use in Animals to voluntarily bring under veterinary oversight all products that continue to be available over the counter. The draft guidance, which means that it is in the thinking stage of FDA, when finalized, will provide information to sponsors of certain new animal drug products who are interested in the change approved marketing status of those products from over-the-counter and prescription with FDA's recommendations. The use of such drugs in animals be limited to uses that veterinary oversight in order to mitigate development of antimicrobial resistance and therefore preserve the effectiveness of these drugs for use as therapies to treat infections in humans and animals. The draft guidance, when finalized, also will recommend timelines for stakeholders wishing to comply voluntarily to this guidance. Although all medically important antimicrobials used in feed and water for food-producing animals are currently under veterinary oversight, some other dosage form products like injectables and tablets that are also intended for use in food-producing and non-food-producing animals will remain available over the counter. This draft guidance also, when finalized, will provide sponsors with specific recommendations on how to facilitate voluntary changes to the approved conditions of use of these drugs to prescription marketing status. The voluntary process outlined in the draft guidance will help ensure new animal drugs containing antimicrobials of human medical importance are administered only under veterinary oversight and only for therapeutic uses. There are many reasons for not buying a meat that states no antibiotics used. This means the animals are often not treated when they are sick, but when they are, they're slaughtered, making some of the meat possibly infected and coming from an animal that is not healthy. Not only is this poor husbandry, it shows that the large farms don't care what kind of product they're making available to the public. Often animals are like humans and decompensate fast, so having this medication on hand would be to make it immediately available for usage is very important. It is against the guidelines for the antibiotic when the farmers and ranchers have it on hand for there to be a withdrawal time from processing from the antibiotic administered to the animal being processed is normally about 30 to 60 days. According to Pew, a charitable trust, the main reason why these actions are being taken is because of the massive use of antibiotics in large farms, which is leading to antibiotic resistance in humans that consume the protein and also the animals that it's being administered on. Like any living matter, it will become resistant or become stronger to avoid being eliminated. Often when the farmers don't take consideration of the antibiotic withdrawal or the antibiotics are placed in feed and water to keep animals from being sick, this overflows into the meat and is consumed by us. Let's look at some statistics. Looking at this statistics, antibiotics are being used in 85% of cattle feedlots and 95% of swine commercial production. Since the pork is higher and also most consumed, we'll look further into it. They believe the larger amount of antibiotics used is because of the conditions that these animals are generally raised in. In 2009, pork was the highest top protein consumed in America. They're also easy to raise and a fast turnaround for commercial farmers. A good grain to weight ratio, a smaller type of animal that can be raised in a small area, and a large barn in mass numbers, usually over 200 piglets in one small confined area. And every 6 months they're processed. So being in that confined barn means close quarters with sick and injured animals, causing the need for antibiotics to be more frequent. The FDA states this is the reason they want to regulate the use of antibiotics, because of how freely they're being used in the commercial market. But putting regulations on over-the-counter antibiotics will have an effect on all farmers, not only commercial. This impact will have on the local farmers would be great. It would cause a ripple effect, making prices for the consumer as well go up. And there's no option for not treating an animal when they're sick. This would be highly unethical, and these animals are family and often the only income for the farmers and ranchers. Looking at the prices to have a large animal vet come out for your swine or your cattle, it's going to be at least $75 for the farm call, and if it's more, if it's an emergency, it's going to be more. Plus the exam is $50, If the animal needs antibiotics, the vet will charge you for the antibiotics plus materials, which is the syringe and the needles, on top of the upcharge, which equals roughly to about $200 or more. This makes it difficult for the smaller farmers or large to make any profit. We also have to consider those vets are coming from far away due to no local large animal vet, especially one that deals with cattle or hogs. The significant problem is the USDA reports do not provide insights to the characteristics of the swine and cattle operations that reported no antibiotic use. Information about practices that could provide valuable clues to antibiotic stewardship. For instance, some of these operations may successfully refine as a set of management processes, vaccines, and other antibiotic alternatives that keep animals healthy with little need for antibiotics. So maybe we need to look into the study on how other operations are functioning without the use of antibiotics instead of punishing the small farmers for using antibiotics. I just believe more drastic measures need to be made. We need to explore more of our options to keep our animals antibiotic resistant. My solution would be to eliminate or limit the confinement practices and raise pork and cattle strictly on pasture and limit the amount of stock a producer can raise. Now, this will not go over with the commercial producers due to the slower turnaround and not make money as fast. It would, however, lead to a more expensive product due to a slower growth rate and slower grain and grass ratio. I admit, but not due to not being able to raise as many and not such in tight quarters would lead to a healthier, happy animal, and antibiotics would be lesser used. Also, to help now, a better option would just be not buying from the grocery stores at all and finding a local producer that takes care of their animals and giving each individualized care. The great thing about argumentative speeches is that when doing research, I often find good information from both sides that are for antibiotic prescriptions and those that are opposed. Reading both sides, I can understand and agree with, but coming from a small pork producer, it will have a great impact when we have an emergency and need medications, but have to often call a vet who could be more than an hour away. Thank you so much for listening to my presentation. Have a good night.